Okay, so I think we've got enough in terms of our GraphQL API to start to play around on the front end and output the list of jobs that we've got along with the tags. So we're going to go ahead and install Nuxt.js. Now, if you've not worked with Nuxt before, the only really thing that you're going to need is Node as well as NPM, which comes with Node, to go ahead and create a Nuxt app. And for this, we're going to use create Nuxt app. So if we come down to NPM here and just go ahead and grab this command, let's go over to the command line and paste this in. We're going to do this outside of this jobs directory here. So we've got two separate folders for each of our projects. So I'm just going to call this jobs client, but of course you can call this whatever you want. Okay, so this brings us into choosing a couple of options. For the project name, I'm just going to keep that as jobs client. We're going to be using JavaScript here, not TypeScript. I'm going to choose NPM as the package manager. In terms of the UI framework, we're going to go ahead and pull in Tailwind because we want to style this out really easily. Of course, what you can do is choose any of these if you're more familiar with any of them. You don't necessarily have to use Tailwind here. Okay, so in terms of the Axios the Nuxt modules we're pulling in, we're going to pull in Axios here because we're going to need to use this to make requests to the backend. We're going to be authenticating in a slightly different way. We're not going to use our GraphQL API to authenticate. We're going to authenticate using the Nuxt auth package, which will just send standard Ajax requests through to our normal RESTful API. So we're just going to pull in Axios to get that working. In terms of linting tools, I'm not going to use any. I'd recommend you do, but I'm not going to do that for the course. And in terms of the testing framework, we're going to choose none here because we're just getting started and we just want to see that Apollo works when we start to pull this through. Okay, so in terms of the rendering mode, we want SSR, so let's pull that in. And in terms of the deployment target, let's just use server because we aren't really concerned with that just now. And the development tools we're going to skip as well. Now for our GitHub username, we're just going to hit enter. And for our version control, we can just choose none here because we're not really necessarily going to push this up to any kind of code hosting just yet. So now that's all done, that's just going to go ahead and run through and install this. It's a pretty standard install here. So let's just wait for this to finish and then we'll boot it up. Okay, so that's all done. This gives us very clear instructions as to how to get started with this. We're going to go into the jobs client directory and we're going to run npm run dev. Now we're going to be changing this a little bit later because we want to run this on a specific host and a specific port. And the reason for that is when we get to using authentication with Laravel Sanctum, we want the domain names to match. So we'll update that in just a second. Let's just make sure we can run this first with npm run dev. And if we just come over to the browser, and sure enough, we should see this getting started. So you can see that we're getting a client and server bundle here. That's just bundling everything together, and we should end up with our new Nuxt app. Great. Okay, so we may as well tackle the host here as well, just before we get started. So let's go over and just modify this. If we take a look at the moment at our package.json file, we've got these scripts in here set to dev, build, start, and generate. Build is what we want to build this for production, and start is slightly different when we have built for production and we want to run this. Of course, dev is while we are building things in our development mode. So I've just pulled this into our text editor and we're going to open up package.json and we're going to add a new command in here called dev host. And of course, you can call that whatever you like. So for this, we're going to use pretty much the same command. So we're still going to run net Nuxt, but we can actually provide a host name to this, and we're going to pass in jobs.test. And for the port, we're going to go ahead and set this to 3333, although you can change that around if you need to, or if you have some kind of collision. So now what we can do with that change in there is grab this command and we can go ahead and run this instead, or in this case, our alias dev host. So let's go ahead and run npm run dev host, and that should boot that up with that host name and that port. So let's just wait for this to build. We're going to come over to here and we're going to say jobs.test. So remember, that's exactly the same domain name as what we have here. Instead, we're just running this on port 3333. There we go. That works. Great. So we've got our Nuxt client set up now. If you are new to Nuxt, then we'll take it nice and easy. But otherwise, we're ready to start styling this up to how we want it to look in the next part.